Well, thank you for joining us today for our cattle marketing webinar series. This is the first of 3 sessions. I'm Ann Johans, and I'm an extension program specialist with Iowa State University, and I get to serve as the moderator for these sessions. And as I mentioned, it's the first of 3 parts, and it is part of a grant that's funded from the North Central Extension Risk Management Education Center and supported by the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture. And this grant was part of a project to focus on core components for better marketing, as well as strategies to expand marketing knowledge for cattle producers. And the great thing about a webinar is that, we have people across the state that have cattle and work on marketing, and so we can catch many of you through this webinar series. In today's session, we are covering cost of production, which is that core piece right before we get into how we can market. And then tomorrow you can join us and come back for yield and quality grade. And then Thursday we will wrap up with marketing strategies. The other piece of this grant project, if you want to really get a little bit more in depth on this, is that there are some in-person courses going on. The first one begins tonight in Decorah. I asked Tim if there was space, if people still wanted to register today to attend that. You sure can. And so that is a 3-part session. So every Tuesday for the next 3 weeks. And then again, they will do a 3-part session way down in Mount Ayr, down in Southwest Iowa. And then if you are near the Guthrie Center area, they're going to do a 1-day program, and that is on May 31st. And I will put the link in the chat box with information to access those if you're interested in registering or sharing that with somebody else. And I will also put the reminder message for today, included the link to download the slides, but I'm going to pop that into the chat box too if you wanted to have the slides to follow along. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ann, for the introduction, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides and make sure that's working.
Looks good.
So today, like I said, this is a 3-part webinar series. Today I'm going to talk about cost of production, and that's really where it starts when we talk about marketing cattle. And as we go back over time, the last several years, the last 20, 30 years, we've all spent a ton of time talking about grain marketing and how to better market our grain and all the tools available to market grain. And cattle producers in the past, for the most part, myself being a cattle producer, we work all year. We raise our animals. We do our best. And I'm a cow-calf producer, and I show up one day at a sale barn somewhere in the fall, and whatever happens, happens. So we have very little control in that scenario on what our calves are going to bring. We just have to hope for the best. So really what we're trying to do is maybe spend some time. Our options are not as vast as the grain marketing people, but we do have options. We do have things to work to help protect ourselves and get some risk protection in place as cattle producers. And that's more important today than in the past, just because of the dollars that are involved. When we watch the markets right now, we all know that these prices are insane. We have a ton of dollars invested. The cows that I was buying 2-3 years ago are twice, if not more, than double, maybe triple of what I was paying for them just a few years ago. So as those dollar amounts increase, the need for risk protection increases along with that. But the first piece to understanding any marketing plan or anything is understanding your cost of production. And so that's why we're starting that with that today. Going to go through some ways to figure your cost of production, some things to think about, some tools to help you figure your own cost of production, and those things today. It's also, I've been in the cattle industry my entire life, and even as a cow-calf producer, a backgrounder, the yield and quality grade is something I think we have to keep in mind. If we do not consistently produce a product that our consumer wants and is searching for, we're going the wrong direction, or we're doing a disservice to the industry. So even though I might not be directly rewarded for selecting the genetics that are going to get the yield and quality grade that the consumer desires, I think indirectly we are affected a little bit in our price But I think it's something, even as a cow-calf producer, a backgrounder, and definitely the cattle feeders that are finishing those cattle definitely have that yield and quality grade in mind when they're marketing their animals. So Chris Clark tomorrow is going to talk about that, and make sure everybody understands what yield and quality grade is, and go through that. And then on Thursday, my colleague Joseph Linsing is going to go through those marketing tools that are available to the cattle producers. And there's some great tools out there available if you're not aware of them. And stay tuned, even if you're a small producer. That's the great thing about some of the products that are available now. They're available for large and small producers. So as I said today, cost of production is the topic, and we'll dive in. So just an overview today. We're going to talk about what is cost of production, why is it so important to cattle producers. We're going to talk about some different ways you can figure cost of production, and resources available to help you determine your cost of production. So cost of production is, well, how many dollars do we have invested in that animal when we go to sell it? And there's lots of ways to think about that. Everybody has their own operation, their own challenges, their own resources they have available to them, their own situation going on. So it's important that you figure it for your operation and understand when you're profitable and when you're not. So what is cost of production? It just refers to the total expenses a business incurs in producing goods or services, encompassing all direct and indirect costs, including raw materials, labor, and overhead. So yeah, it's whether you're producing a widget to sell or producing an animal to sell, what does it cost you to get them to the point where they are ready to sell? So when we get into why is it important, we need to make marketing decisions. You know, there's a lot of cow-calf producers, and I don't know who's online here today and whether you're a cow-calf person or a backgrounder or finishing cattle, or maybe you're going from one end to the other. Maybe you've got some cows and you're feeding out your own calves to finish. Whatever that is, all of these principles apply to that, and I'll try to make it applicable across the way. But making those decisions for a cow-calf guy example that maybe has some backgrounding lots as well, we need to understand when we get to the point when we wean those calves, is it a good financial decision for us to put those calves in the lot and feed them another 60, 90 days to take advantage of that feeder market, or is it more profitable for us to sell them today and go that way? And making those decisions really comes back to cost of production. And if you don't understand your cost of production, it's really hard to make those decisions. One of the biggest things I hear as I talk to people across Iowa, anybody that knows me knows that I love talking about cattle, and I have a lot of conversations with a lot of people. When we're making those decisions, my biggest pet peeve is when I ask an operation why they do what they do, when I get the answer of, well, that's how grandpa did it, and that's how dad did it, so that's how we do it. Well, I love tradition, and I think that's all great, but I think we need to make those decisions off of financial choices, not just tradition. And I like to evaluate the different enterprises. So in the circumstance I just talked about, or even if you're taking them to fed cattle, I like to look at my cow-calf operation as one enterprise, and then my backgrounding yard is a second enterprise. Even though they're the same animals, I still own them. I like to analyze those separately to see if I'm where the money is being made in that operation. And even if I'm feeding those cattle out, I would have a third enterprise in that fed cattle enterprise. We can break that down by enterprise and help us make better decisions. It also helps us if we're wanting to expand our operation. Where are we making money? What are we good at? What things have been profitable for us in the past, and let's expand those. And also understanding what maybe we're not the best at, and being able to understand that and understand where that profit is coming from will help us understand where to expand or contract to utilize our operation and our unique situation, and input purchase decisions. When are we buying our hay? When are we buying our corn? When are we buying our supplements? What, are we chopping silage? Are we feeding distillers? There's all kinds of decisions that we're making out there, and making sure we're making those decisions off of good financial um, decision making is really important to ensure the profitability of the operation. So there's some different ways to figure cost of production. We can keep track of all of our costs for the year. I kind of call this the uh, the accountant approach or the tax approach. Um, we look at our Schedule F at the end of the year. We look at all the costs that we had. We look at our inputs and try to decide where we're at. We can try to project what our costs are going to be for forecast, what our costs are going to be for the year. Or we can look at other operations and benchmark ourselves against those. So we're going to kind of dive into those three a little deeper. So the first one, like I said, this I kind of call the Schedule F, where we track our own costs, and it's a great way to analyze the past year. When we sit down at the end of the year, we can look at what decisions we made, how they affected our operation. We can do a lot of things with that. We can find inefficiencies in our operation as we look at those costs of where we had maybe there was this year wasn't the case, but a couple years ago, hay was a major cost to any operation that was having to buy hay because of the shortage. We had a little relief in that last year, but we can start looking at what are those major costs in our operation. We can start trying to find efficiencies on how we can reduce those costs in our operation to move forward. It really does take good record keeping, and all of these analyses that we do, I like to say it's a junk in, junk out type situation. If we are not putting good numbers into the calculations, then the numbers we get out, we cannot expect those to be good. So really trying to keep those costs, good records on those costs, keeping good records so we can go back and analyze those things is really important. And we have to be honest with ourselves. We have to make sure those records are accurate and realistic. You can kind of spot some things pretty quick when people try fooling themselves with these. It's in your best interest to be honest, and if there is an inefficiency there or someplace that's costing us too much money, we really need to be able to identify that to go ahead and move forward. The problem with this method is it doesn't give us much forecasting going forward. It's always looking in the rearview mirror. How did we do last year? And doesn't necessarily always account for the change of times, changing times and different cost of inputs and that type of stuff that we have going forward. So it's a great way to analyze what's happened in the past, but if we're looking forward, we might be more able to make changes in our operation as we move forward to stay profitable. So that's our next kind of way of going through this and projecting what costs we're going to have in the coming year. This way we can look to make those improvements real time. If the cost of hay or corn or whatever input it might be increases greatly, we can start looking at alternatives in real time versus waiting till the end of the year to realize that was an issue. It also allows us to look for marketing opportunities. If we have a pretty good estimation on what our costs are going to be for the year, as we go through the year, we can look at those marketing opportunities, and Joseph's going to get a lot deeper into those opportunities on Thursday. I don't want to steal his thunder, but as we start looking at price protection and those other things, we have to kind of have an idea of where we are in the future to be able to make those good decisions. So this process of looking forward works a lot better for that. And we can, like I said, realize or foresee decisions or issues that are coming ahead of us and try to make better decisions ahead of time to avoid those. And once again with these, it's really imperative that we're honest and realistic in our numbers. You know, just to be 100% honest with ourselves. We don't have to go tell all of our neighbors what our projections are or what we come up with. But if we're going to identify ways for our operation to become more profitable, we have to be honest with ourselves on what those costs are. So this is an Ag Decision Maker file B1-21, and Ann, I'm sure we'll be putting this in the chat and the resources that you'll get in a follow-up email to do this yourself. These are our livestock enterprise budgets that we maintain, and this is a great resource for you to use on looking at your operation and trying to project those costs. So this particular one that I have in front of us now is a cow-calf operation. And we're looking at just one cow unit. What does it cost us to keep one cow around for a year? If we can know what it costs us to keep that cow around for a year, we can start looking at what do we need to sell that calf for to be profitable. So the way these Ag Decision Maker files work, if you haven't worked with them in the past, is any of the yellow or tan, whatever color you want to call that, cells are cells that you have the ability to change and put your own numbers in. So we start out with, this is a cow-calf operation, focusing on hay and pasture, and we're selling the calves right off of the cow. We put in a weaning rate. So this is, you start out the year with a X number of cows, how many are open, how many cows do you get to wean a calf off of from where you start with. In this example, I put 92%. Now, that's why I say these cells are interchangeable. You can say, Tim, that's ridiculous. We do way better than that. Or you say, Tim, we calve in January outside without a shed. We lose more calves than that. Whatever the case may be, you can change that number to match your operation. I'm just taking a stab in the dark, or this is an example, if you will. So calf death loss is 2%. Cow death loss is 1%. And cow replacement rate is 10%. So how many cows are you taking out of the herd every year, calling out of the year, and either saving your own replacement heifers or buying heifers to replace those, whatever it might be. I have 10% in there. Once again, I have operations that I work with that will keep those cows around until they take their last breath. And I have other operations that once a cow gets 8-9 years old, they go ahead and turn those over. So just depending on your operation, you can change that number to what you want to do. The next section down here is income, and I've left the price 0, and I hope it'll make sense later on. You can project a price in there if you want. I like it to leave it 0, and I'll show you why here in a little while. You know, I'm looking at weaning those calves for 500 pounds for heifers, 550 for steers. Once again, you put your numbers in there, and I've got my call cows at $1.30 a pound of those cows that I am taking out of the herd. So there is a little income that comes back off of that at the end of the life of that cow. So after you've entered all that, and this is all one page on this file, I've got it broken into 3 pages just to make it easier for you to read. The next section we get into is our variable cost. So we have pasture, we have fertilizer, we have corn. If you're feeding some distillers grains or some silage, whatever the case may be, you can go ahead and put your numbers in there. I've got 4 tons of hay per cow. I'm renting some stocks or utilizing some stocks for those cows at a cost. But I have all my feed costs in there. And this is where it really comes important when I talk about being realistic. And we'll get into this more later, but I'm using $4.80 a dollar per bushel corn. And that's another one of my pet peeves when I talk to cattle producers and I say, you're feeding your cows some corn, or you've got your feedlot, what does your corn cost you? And the response I get sometimes is, well, my corn is free, it's in the bin, I just go get it. Well, it didn't show up in that bin for free, right? There is still a cost associated with that. Same thing with hay. Sometimes people like to undervalue their hay, and I like to put realistic cost. If I had to go buy that corn today, even if I raised it, if I had to go buy it, or what could have I sold it for? Maybe a better way to look at it, what was the value of that corn when I put it in the bin? And that needs to be charged back to the cows. Just how you want to do it is up to you. Like I said, it goes back to the enterprises, you know, that that row crop enterprise or operation on your farm needs to be paid for that corn that they're feeding to the cows, or accounted for, so you can really evaluate the profitability of that operation. Same way with the hay, those other corn stalks, those other resources that you have, there has to be some value attributed to those. So really encourage you to go pull up this Ag Decision Maker file and put in your own numbers and see what you come up with. But I have total feed costs of $813 a year for those cows. Then we have some veterinary costs, machinery, equipment, fuel, repairs, all of those things. That's another thing we really got to be honest with ourselves. It's another conversation I get when we talk about machinery. Sometimes my producers will say, well, Tim, I just use the tractor that we planted, you have on the bean planter to feed the cows in the winter, so that tractor doesn't cost me anything. Well, we're still putting fuel in it. We're still repairing it. We still need to account for some of the value of that tractor towards those cows, and operating that tractor especially. Next, we get into your interest rates. Maybe some of you are in great shape and you aren't borrowing any money on your operation, and that's great. If you are, there's a place here for you can account for that with the feed cost and labor. And this is another one we get into. I really think that we are doing ourselves a disservice when we give our labor away for free. And I get this conversation a lot too of, Tim, what else would I be doing, right? I got the cows. I'm not doing anything else. I don't need paid for it. Well, you can go to Casey's and get a job, right? There's other ways that you can make income with that time, so you need to account for that time. And I have 8 hours per cow in this example, but once again, all of these numbers, I encourage you to put your own numbers in. Giving me a total variable cost of $900 per cow for the year. So the last column we get into is the fixed costs. So we'll get into this more and explain the difference, but the fixed costs are the costs that you would have whether you had those animals or not. So that tractor, the equipment, the cost of those cows, your bull depreciation cost, we call those costs. So I come up with another $1,500 there, or I'm sorry, $450 there of fixed cost, giving us a total cost of $1,510 to keep that cow around for a year. But we had some cull cows that we sold for some income, coming up with a total income over all costs of $1,352. So because I left those top numbers zero earlier when I was saying what I was expecting to sell my calves for, when we get a break-even selling price here, this gives us a true break-even. So I'm guessing some of you have had a little sticker shock when you saw this $1,500 number, because I did, is when I first started playing around this with my own cow herd. It doesn't seem like it takes that much to keep the cows around for a year. And like I said, I really encourage you to go back through this and put your own numbers in and come up with your own number, but I'm guessing it'll be higher than what you expected it's going to be. And that's okay. It's just being honest and really understanding that. But the good news is with today's markets, is we look down here on break-even cost, just over our variable cost. So those costs that we talked about earlier, your feed cost, those variable costs, $2.14 a pound for that 550-pound steer calf. Today's market shows that there's still a ton of profit in raising these calves, even with that high cost of keeping that cow for a year. And if we want to look at all cost, including those costs that we'd have whether we raised calves or not, we got $3.20 a pound. Still a lot of profit left in these animals. So by this simple, I shouldn't say simple, but by really evaluating what the cost of keeping that cow is around, we can see that right now in today's markets, there's definitely some profit available. So just try to be fair with everybody on the call today. We might have some backgrounders or fed cattle, and we have files available for them too. I just did a quick kind of backgrounding scenario here. Once I leave that price zero so we can get that true break even at the bottom. I'm assuming I'm going to take these calves to 850 pounds, and I'm starting with them at 450. I just looked at the Iowa market report and saw some 450 pound calves that sold last week for 405. So if I take those calves, my variable cost, I have some interest on buying those calves. Same thing on feed costs. You can put your own numbers in here, whatever you want. Our health, our machinery, all of that stuff adds in there. Our labor, our interest on our feed, we come up with $2,151 to get that calf to 850 pounds for variable cost. We still have some fixed cost and machinery, equipment, housing, that type of stuff of another $22 per head, giving us total cost of $2,174 in my example. Once again, I hope you're going, taking this and putting your own numbers in here. But once again, that 850 pound calf, the break-even cost on it is $2.53. So everything I sell it for, anything I get over $2.53 a pound would be profit. So a lot of money tied up here, and that's why it's so important. Hopefully you'll tune back in for Thursday for Joseph to kind of give you your options on how you can protect yourself in today's market and take advantage of some of the prices we're seeing today. So that's just kind of a quick run through of how that works. It is on Ag Decision Maker, and we'll put that in there, your notes to follow up. My name and contact information is available on that, hopefully with this webinar. If you got any questions on how to fill that out, I'd be happy to have a conversation with you. So once we understand what those costs are, we can really make some good decisions. So the third way that you can do, if you want the quick and easy, the easy button, if you will, we can look at other operations to compare ourselves to try to come up with cost of production. So this can be really useful to benchmark ourselves. So we can look at our costs versus what other people are doing and say, man, my numbers are awful high compared to what the industry is, or maybe my numbers, I'm doing a really good job. It helps us put that in relation a little bit to understand how we're doing. But we have to understand when we look at these benchmarks that it's not specific to our farm. Right? Everybody has their own situation, their own resources. We talked about that earlier, but it is still a good way to benchmark yourself, and it's pretty simple to do. So here's just a couple charts that I like to look at. This is the LMIC data. Which goes back to 1997, and you can see the cost, estimated average cow-calf cost, basically what's it cost to keep a cow around for a year. The number we were talking about earlier, we came up with $1,300. In 2025, they're saying it's $1,060. Now, they don't give us a lot of information on what all they include other than total cash costs, pasture rent, and what are those annual costs. So we don't know if we're exactly comparing apples to apples, but in our scenario, we were a little high compared to this. So we might want to look at, are there some efficiencies somewhere we can to gain or not, but just gives us a good way to compare ourselves to others. Even this $1,000 shocks a lot of people and don't always realize it does cost that much to keep a cow around. But I challenge you to do those numbers for yourself and see what it costs you to keep a cow around. If we're backgrounding calves this spring, here's a beef basis number that comes out. They're looking at buying these calves, you know, at 750 pound calf, and putting the 50, 100, up to 250 pounds of gain on it over different time periods. And they're showing some profitability still in feeding those calves at today's prices. So once again, this doesn't tell us a lot about your operation other than comparing it to what other people are seeing or what you should be looking at for a benchmark to know where you're at. So we talked about costs a lot and the spreadsheet. I just want to go into a little more depth on those fixed costs, variable costs, and opportunity costs that we looked at in those earlier sheets. just so you understand, the fixed costs are the costs you have whether you have the cattle or not. So your building, your lots, your infrastructure, your tractors, whatever you might have around there that you're going to have whether you have cattle or not. Um, we all have some land that maybe we can't farm or do other things with. They're going to cost us whether we have cows out there or not. Uh, all of that infrastructure is going to cost, and that's kind of what we call those fixed costs. When we look at variable costs, those are costs you would have if you did not have the cattle. So you wouldn't need the feed, you wouldn't have the labor, the interest, the vet bills, those things that you wouldn't have if the cattle weren't there, are more your variable cost. And I alluded to it a little earlier, but I think it's really important that we understand opportunity costs. And that's the loss of potential gain from alternatives, when one alternative is chosen. So if we decide to put that corn in the bin and feed the cattle versus selling the corn, there is a cost associated with that. That corn is not free, right? And we can have the conversation, and I don't care, just as long as you're honest and understand what you're doing. Do you put the cost of production from your corn as your value? And plus the storage that it costs you to keep it around? Do you put what you could sell that corn for? Do you use a number that you would have to buy corn for if you weren't using that corn? You can decide on what number you want to use, but I think you have to be honest with yourself and use a number. Hay is another one that I hear a lot of people that, oh, Tim, we just bale some water ditches, some waterways and some ditches and stuff around. It really doesn't cost us anything for that hay. Well, uh, it does cost you something to make the hay. And if you didn't have cattle, you could sell that hay. So what is the true value of that hay? And once again, we can have the conversation on what number you want to use. I just want to make sure you are using a number and you understand why you're using the number you're using. And I talked about labor earlier. If you are not paying yourself, you notice when I went through all of these, none of these had any dollars in there for your family living expenses, anything else. So if you're not paying yourself, then I think you're doing yourself an in-service. You need to account for that cost because you could be doing something else with your time, and that's an opportunity cost that you have because you've chosen to have the cattle. So went through things fairly quickly there, and hopefully you guys have been filling up the chat box and have lots of questions, and we can talk about some of this stuff in some more depth. So.
All right. Thank you, Tim. Yes, that chat box is there for questions to come in. This is such a core piece of the decisions that we make on our farms. And you talked about this, but one of the things I just want to go back to whether or not, and I think it's the thing that probably comes up the most, is the price to use when we're talking about those feed costs that we might also be raising on the farm. So I would use what that corn would have cost me to purchase, right? That or what I would have sold it at, because that's the true cost of that enterprise. And then I want to look at the true cost of my cattle enterprise, right? To know
Yeah.
when I'm making those whole farm decisions, are those enterprises individually making money? What are the true costs of those enterprises? And so what's the argument that people make when they're looking at using their actual cost of production on maybe corn or that hay production?
Um, I don't know that it's a good argument, but it's really a shell game on where you want to see the profit, right? So that's why I say it's understanding that. If you are going to use that number, understand that some of the profit you're seeing in your beef enterprise is stolen from your row crop enterprise, right? So when we start analyzing those operations, understanding what cost you used and how that affects it, I think is the most important thing. I think you should either use one of two numbers personally, either what it would cost you to buy that corn, but sometimes that can get muddy because the elevator might have a lift charge, delivery, right? There's some added costs in there that you really don't have. So another cost to use is just what on your operation, what was your average price for corn this year? And you took 5,000 bushels out of that. So put that average cost of the rest of your bushels against the bushels that you fed to the cattle is another way you could do it. But like I said, using a cost is a big improvement over what a lot of people do. But yeah, to really be, and it goes back to trash in, trash out. If we aren't putting good numbers and honest numbers in there, we can't expect the numbers that we get out to be very useful.
Yeah. And as you look at this year to year, also just to be consistent too. So, okay, if you pick one,
Yes.
don't change that based on maybe the economics in any given year, right? To be consistent over time is super important too.
Excellent point. Yeah. And like I said, these are hard numbers to look at sometimes. This right now, it's a great time to look at them because we're making money. It's the cattleman's year, right? We are living high on the hog. Um, in some years, they are a lot harder to look at. In some years, uh, we talk about this in grain marketing all the time, but it's the same in cattle. There is maximizing profits and there's minimizing losses some years. And this happens to be a good year, but there are tough years where we are trying to minimize losses versus capturing profits. So being honest with yourself and being consistent is extremely important.
And in good times, it's hard to talk about, that everything is a cycle, right?
Yes.
And I know that we've had some articles on our Egg Decision Maker website here recently talking specifically about cattle cycles. And I'd be happy to put those in the chat box, or I have to look those up. I don't have them handy right now, but I'll put those in the follow-up email because I think it is something to consider. So when we look at uh, that cycle, what categories within, because I think sometimes when we talk about our cost of production, just going through the categories is so important too, to consider areas that you might not be taking into account. And so when we look at areas where producers might focus in on if they want to make changes to their cost of production, where would you suggest they start?
Well, the low hanging fruit's always the feed cost, right? Is there a way to, if you are truly charging yourself what that hay is worth, maybe you're raising higher quality hay than what you need, and you could sell that hay and buy back some lower quality hay. Or maybe you're raising lower quality than you need, and the best thing for your operation is selling that and buying back some higher quality hay. But I think really that feed cost is a low hanging fruit to where we can try to make some changes. And I think today's times and the environment that we're in today is the perfect time to really start asking those questions and looking at making changes right now because we are profitable. It's a lot harder to make those changes when times are tough, right? So these are the times where we really need to be challenging ourselves and trying to, it seems counterintuitive, but these are the times we really need to be trying to tighten our belts and figure out where we can save money so that we're better prepared to go through those tougher times.
And being efficient, right? And
Yeah.
are there ways that you could make your operation and to be more efficient long term, whether it's facilities or um, feed ratios, right? They're looking for those efficiencies as well
Yeah,
during
those
this time.
machinery
Yeah.
costs and fuels another place I love to look. Um, just like farming, we do a lot of recreational tractor driving and cattle operations sometimes, right? I've seen guys move bales 4 times around the farmstead, and it's just like, man, that costs money every time you pick one of those up, whether you want to admit it or not. It really does. So, just those efficiencies, the feed costs, really trying to find places, um, and it all starts with figuring out what your costs are to figure out where you need to tighten that belt.
Yeah. Very good. Okay. Oh, yeah. So I think I know that we were talking about we weren't going to run over for sure, right? Folks, we're going to be
Yes.
good on time. It's a beautiful day. I do have a couple more questions, and one is discussing the difference in backgrounding and finishing calves.
Okay. So when I think of backgrounding, I think of taking those calves at weaning off of the cow, um, and you're feeding them from that 400, 500 pound, whatever, up to the 850, 900 pound. A lot of the big feedlots out west, especially, they are really good at feeding cattle from 900 pounds to finish. So there's a piece there from taking that calf from 400, 500 pounds and getting to that to 900 pounds. So yeah, it's that kind of window in between when that calf leaves its mother to when it's 800 to 1,000 pounds and ready to go to that feedlot. It's usually a higher roughage um, type of a diet, maybe a little less corn and yeah, just growing that animal to get it ready for that high-paced feedlot.
Yeah. And I don't have those stats like in my fresh in my mind within within Iowa. Like, are the majority of our operations, are they finishing, or do we have a lot of backgrounding facilities in the state?
I'm from Southwest Iowa, and we have a lot of backgrounding facilities in our state in Southwest Iowa. The big feedlots in Kansas and Nebraska, like I said, they don't want them until they're 850, 900 pounds. Even a lot of those big feedlots will buy the cattle, and they'll put them and custom grow them in a lot somewhere in southern Iowa to get them up to where they're ready for them. So
Yeah. I think that we have a mix across the state, right? And that's the great way about this webinar is that we can hopefully touch all those different types of facilities because I we have them all.
yeah.
And so with that, Tim, do you have any final thoughts before I wrap us up for the day?
No, just thank you everybody for joining us today. And if you didn't catch us and you're listening to this on the recording, like I said, my contact information is available. You send me an email. I'd happy to answer your questions as well. And it is important to know your cost, and it's whether you're big or small, whether you have 10 cows or 1,000 cows. It's really important to know your cost and be able to make those good decisions. This
Absolutely.
is a business, right? That you need to treat it like a business.
Absolutely. And so we are back tomorrow, right? This is just the first of three. Chris Clark, our livestock specialist, is going to be with us talking about yield and quality grade. I already told him yesterday I know nothing except it was delicious. And so I am going to learn a lot, and I'm sure I will come with lots of my own questions, and I hope all of you will as well. You can bring a friend. I know we had close to 100 registered for this session, these sessions, and so it's great to be able to reach so many folks on their cattle marketing decisions. And then Thursday, we'll wrap up with those marketing strategies with our farm management specialist, Joseph Lensing. And so, again, you will get this replay before tomorrow's session starts. You'll get some reminders about the sessions as well. And so, thank you so much for joining us. But we're going to go ahead and sign off and enjoy this beautiful day.
Yep. Thank you, everybody.